So, animals are not the only organisms with tissues and organs. Plant cells are also another type of organism that have specialized cells, and their needs are different to those of animals and humans. Therefore, their specialized cells are different to animals and humans. So, which types of specialized plant cells do you know? Here I've got a few photos of various specialized plant cells, and we'll go into more detail about each of them. So the first specialized plant cell we have is the root hair cell. Here I've covered up the labels for each of the subcellular structures or different organelles. So try to pause this video now and take a guess as to what each label is covering. And then we'll go through the answers. So what is a root hair cell? A root hair cell are cells that you would find close to the tips of growing roots. And plants need to take in lots of water as well as mineral ions. And the root hair cells helps to take up these water and mineral ions more efficiently. So root hair cells are always relatively close to the xylem tissue. And we'll go into more detail about what the xylem is later on in the video. But essentially the xylem helps to carry water and mineral ions up into the rest of the plant. And mineral ions are moved by this process called active transport, which we'll go into in more detail when we're covering different types of transport. But the active transport carries the mineral ions from outside, so from the soil, into the root hair cell. And going through our labels, from the top clockwise, we've got the cell membrane, and then that's surrounded by the cell wall. And then this long extension is the root hair, and the green bit in the middle is called the vacuole. Then around the vacuole, we've got the cytoplasm, the nucleus, which is the red dot, mitochondria, and ribosomes. So again, lots of similar subcellular structures to what we've seen before. But how does the root hair cell differ? So root hair cell, they've got a greatly increased surface area due to the long root hair, and this helps water move into the cell. They also have a large permanent vacuole, which helps to speed up the movement of water through osmosis. And again, osmosis is one of the types of transport. And the water is osmosed from the soil across the root hair cell. And lastly, root hair cells have many mitochondria. This helps transfer energy needed for active transport. So it's in the name, active. Active means it requires energy. And this active transport, like we mentioned earlier, is for mineral ions to enter the root hair cell. So here we've got an exam question which shows a diagram. It says figure 1. Figure 1 shows a specialized cell that absorbs substance from the soil. Name the type of specialized cell in figure 1. And then the next question says, describe how the cell in figure 1 is adapted to increase the absorption of substances from the soil. So hopefully from the content that we just talked about earlier, you're able to answer this exam question on your own. The next type of specialized plant cell we're going to be talking about is the photosynthetic cell. So this would look quite similar to the normal plant cell that we talked about before. So here I've covered up the labels again and try to fill in the blanks. So one of the ways that plants differ from animals is that plants can make their own food through this process called photosynthesis. And there are lots of plant cells that can carry out photosynthesis and lots of plant cells that cannot. So how do we know that this cell can carry out photosynthesis? Well, we'll have to think about their adaptations. So firstly, these photosynthetic cells contain specialized green structures. These are called chloroplasts. And inside the chloroplast, we've got chlorophyll. And what are the chlorophyll responsible for? They help to trap the light needed for photosynthesis, because photosynthesis is a light-dependent reaction where we're producing glucose for energy or for food, as well as oxygen. Photosynthetic cells are also usually found in continuous layers in the leaves and the outer layers of the stems of the plant. So this helps the cells absorb as much light as possible because, as we mentioned earlier, photosynthesis requires light. Plant cells also have a large permanent vacuole, and this helps keep the cell rigid as a result of osmosis. And these cells, rigid cells, are arranged together to form photosynthetic tissue. So remember, cells come together to form tissues, which come together to form organs, which then form organ systems, and then it forms the organism as a whole. So what's the point of these rigid cells? They help to support the stem. And they keep the leaf spread out as well to capture as much light as possible. The next type of specialized plant cell is the xylem cell. Have you heard of this before? So the xylem cell is the transport of tissue in plants that carries water and mineral ions from the roots to the highest leaves and shoots. So remember, it's one direction, it goes from the bottom up. And the xylem is also important in supporting the plant. So how is the xylem cell adapted to its functions? It has two main adaptations. Firstly, xylem cells are alive when they're first formed, but a special chemical called lignin builds up in these spirals, and you can see that in the diagram on the right. So the lignin builds up in the cell walls, and then the cells die. This leaves the long hollow tube in the middle. And within this tube, water and mineral ions are allowed to move easily through them, from one end of the plant to the other. So this is from the bottom up. The spirals and rings of lignin in the xylem cell helps make them very strong. This is important to withstand the pressure because the water moves up the plant cell quite quickly at high pressure. And again, like we mentioned earlier, this is also for support for the cell. The next type of specialized cell is a phloem. And here I've covered up some of the labels, so again, try to fill in the blanks. So phloem, just like the xylem, is a specialized transport tissue, but how it differs here is that it carries the food. And this is the food that has been made through photosynthesis around the plant. And unlike the xylem, it's made of live cells, so we've got phloem cells, and it does not become lignified and it does not die. So the food can move up and down. So this is again where it differs. It moves in two directions, and this is dependent on where the food is needed. So what are the adaptations for the phloem cells? So the cell walls between the cells break down to form sieve plates, and these allow carrying dissolved food to move freely up and down the tubes where it's needed. Phloem cells lose lots of their internal structure, but are supported by companion cells, which we can see on the sides. And these companion cells help to keep the cells alive. The mitochondria are found in the companion cells, and similar to other cells before, mitochondria is important for production of energy, and the energy is required to move the dissolved food up and down the plant in the phloem. So here we've got a diagram that represents a side-by-side comparison of the xylem vessel and the phloem vessel. So they talk about the direction of the flow, the contents that travel, as well as the cells involved. So now try to fill in the blank here that shows the comparison between the xylem and the phloem. And we'll go through the answers now. So firstly, xylem, the transport is a physical process, so it does not require energy, whereas in the phloem, it does require energy. So that's why phloem cells have lots of mitochondria in the companion cells. The substances that are being transported in the xylem is the water and minerals, and in the phloem is the products of photosynthesis. So this is the food that we were talking about. For example, sucrose and amino acids. So sucrose is a type of sugar, and amino acids are what are used to make proteins. And then direction of transport, the xylem, it only goes upwards, so in one direction, from the bottom, so where the roots are, to the top, and that's where the leaves are. Phloem, on the other hand, transports food in two directions, so upwards and downwards. So that's it for specialized plant cells, and hopefully we've clarified the 3 different types of specialized plant cells.